I think I asked the wrong question a few weeks ago when I asked my followers on social media why good frontline workers were leaving. Hundreds of people responded, and some of the comments were exactly what I had expected: burnout, low pay, impossible workloads, and feeling completely unsupported. But after I read a few dozen, I noticed that they were all orbiting around the same problem. One person wrote that they were expected to provide resources that simply didn't exist. Another said that the work keeps getting more complex and the resources keep shrinking. Another described spending every day apologizing for systems that they didn't create. And that felt familiar to me. I mean, there are days when I leave my clinic and I feel like I've done more case management than I have practiced medicine. I'm helping facilitate calls to treatment and supporting housing applications and figuring out transport and applying for social assistance. Some days I've made half a dozen calls before noon and none of them involved medicine. Every time, the resource simply wasn't there. The person on the other end of the line cares. They just didn't have anything to offer. Or the resource technically existed, the bed exists, the person doesn't qualify though. The housing program exists, but the wait list is years long. Transportation exists, but not where this person lives. Frontline workers understand something that the public rarely sees. There is a difference between a resource existing and a resource being available. And that gap is where a lot of our frustration lives. And the longer I sat with those comments, the more something became clear. Almost none of them were really about burnout. Burnout was the consequence. The deeper story was about trying to practice good care inside systems that often can't support it. And then I realized something else. I'd only asked half the question. If we only ask why people leave, we end up with a catalog of everything that's broken in the system. And that's important, but it's incomplete because hundreds of those same people went back to work the next day. Why? So I asked another question. Why do people stay? And one of the comments resonated with me all week because bearing witness to humanity is a privilege. I kept wondering why that sentence landed so strongly. And I think it points to something specific, being invited into moments that very few people ever see. Fear, relief, grief, joy, shame, hope. Every now and then, someone stops me at a grocery store or on the ferry or downtown, and they'll say, "You probably don't remember me." And most of the time, they're right. And then they'll remind me where we met. And maybe it was years ago. Maybe it was one visit in the emergency department. Maybe it was an outreach clinic. And then they'll describe a conversation that I barely remember and say something like, "You were the first person who listened," or "That was the day I decided to go to treatment." I always leave those conversations thinking the same thing. We have almost no idea which interactions people carry with them. As frontline workers, we tend to evaluate ourselves based on outcomes. Did they get housing? Did they stop using? Did they make the appointment? Did the treatment work? The people we care for often evaluate us by something completely different. Did I feel respected? Did somebody believe me? Did I feel safe enough to tell the truth? Did someone stay when things got uncomfortable? Those are two very different scorecards, and I think we underestimate the second one. I notice it most in small changes. Someone accepts a sandwich after refusing food all week. Someone asks you to remember their name. Someone answers honestly instead of saying, "Oh, I'm just fine." I remember there was one client we would see over and over on outreach. Every engagement looked the same. We'd talk, I'd check in, we'd make a plan, and then one day, just as they were walking away, they turned and said, "Hey, can I get an naloxone kit?" 30 seconds. And to anyone else, that would have looked like nothing. But to me, it felt enormous because to me, trust had shifted. They had never agreed to take naloxone before. None of these shifts show up in a performance dashboard. Nobody writes annual reports about them. But I suspect that those are some of the moments that keep people in this work. We spend an awful lot of time measuring outcomes, and I sometimes wonder whether we've gotten less skilled at recognizing progress. They aren't the same thing. Sometimes progress is invisible unless you've known someone for a long time. That's one more reason relationships matter so much in frontline work. Only someone who's been there for the whole journey can see how far someone's actually come. And here's what surprised me the most. Almost nobody answered my question by talking about the job. Nobody said that they stayed because they enjoyed documentation. Big surprise. Nobody mentioned performance indicators. Nobody talked about strategic plans. They talked about people, relationships, trust, connection. One person wrote, because the people who need services don't get to walk away from the struggle. The least I can do is keep showing up. And another wrote, because bearing witness to humanity is a privilege. Another said, every day there's at least one sacred moment to experience or witness. And that made me wonder whether we've misunderstood what frontline work actually is. We often talk about relationships as though they're something extra, the soft part of the work, the rewarding part. I've come to think that relationships are the work itself. In addiction medicine, trust isn't something that you build after treatment starts. Trust is something that makes treatment possible. And I think the same is true in homelessness and mental health and harm reduction. The same is true in outreach and in social work. Without a relationship, people don't tell you what's really happening. They don't tell you that they relapsed. They don't tell you that they're sleeping outside again. They don't tell you that they're afraid. It's the ground that everything else stands upon. There are people I've known for years. Sometimes our whole interaction lasts less than a minute. How are things? Still breathing, they'll say. And we laugh. And I ask whether they need anything. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. And then we both carry on with our day. And to someone who's walking past, it looks completely ordinary. But if that conversation has happened every couple of weeks for 5 years, something else is going on. We're maintaining a relationship. We're maintaining some degree of trust. We're keeping open the possibility that one day, when something really matters, they'll talk to me about it. And I don't think we can appreciate how much healing happens through that kind of consistency. Ordinary consistency, showing up, remembering someone's name, asking again, staying in the picture. And maybe that's why so many people answered my question by talking about relationships instead of achievements. Relationships make the work feel worthwhile. They also make the work possible. And just when I thought I understood the conversation, somebody interrupted it. They wrote, I have bills to pay. And another person wrote, what else am I going to do for work? And I'm really glad that they did, because it's easy to romanticize frontline work. It's easy to tell ourselves that everyone who stays does it for purpose. Life is more complicated than that. Some people stay because they genuinely love the work. Some stay because they're supporting a family. Some stay because they need the benefits. Some stay because they spent 15 years building skills that they don't feel they can transfer easily to something else. Some stay because despite everything, they still believe that this is where they belong. And those are different people's realities. I think about colleagues who care deeply about this work and are also trying to pay a mortgage or save for retirement or support aging parents. Those practical realities don't make someone less committed. They make them human. And there's another comment that stayed with me. Someone wrote, every job is hard. I'd rather be stressing about something important than something meaningless. I thought that was worth sitting with. Some people absolutely should leave if that's what they need to do. Sometimes leaving is the healthiest decision that someone can make for themselves. Sometimes the organization is doing real harm. Sometimes the work has changed. Sometimes you've changed. There shouldn't be shame in any of that. But a lot of frontline workers make a conscious choice. If they're going to spend 40 hours a week doing something difficult, they'd rather spend it on something that they believe contributes to another person's life. That doesn't erase burnout. That doesn't erase poor leadership. That doesn't erase impossible workloads. It just helps to explain why so many thoughtful, capable people keep showing up anyway. After reading hundreds of comments, I think I finally understood what people were trying to tell me. Most of them weren't describing a job, they were describing relationships. People don't stay because of the system. The system is often exactly what makes the work so difficult. People stay because of the people that they meet inside of the system. Clients, coworkers, peers, communities. And maybe that's the paradox. The same people who sometimes break your heart are often the reason you keep coming back tomorrow. I think there's something here for leaders too. When organizations get overwhelmed, I think the first instinct is often efficiency. Increase the caseloads, shorten appointments, move people between teams, cover vacancies by spreading the work out across everyone else. Each decision can look reasonable on its own, but together they gradually wear down the very thing workers kept describing: continuity, relationships, time. If relationships are central to good frontline care, then protect them as part of the work. By protecting them, I mean something specific: creating the conditions where relationships have time to develop, stable teams, fair pay, reasonable workloads, the opportunity to debrief, the chance to know people over months and years instead of days. Relationships don't happen by accident. Organizations either create the conditions for them or they simply make them impossible. I still think about people that I met years ago. In many cases, I didn't solve anything for them. I think about them because they changed how I understand frontline care. They taught me that progress is rarely linear, that relapse doesn't erase growth, that trust can take months to build and seconds to lose, that people make far more sense once you understand the conditions that they're living in. That's why this conversation has stayed with me. I started by asking why people were leaving. I expected to hear about burnout. And what I heard instead was more complicated. People described systems that often make good care difficult. They also described relationships that make difficult work worth returning to. Both of those things can be true. And maybe they usually are. So I'm curious, after everything that you've experienced in frontline care, what keeps you coming back? I'm Dr. Marcus Greatheart.